Hi guys, so Keir Starmer and Boris Johnson are now back in Parliament, and on the first day in Parliament they clashed over a number of issues. So let's hear what they had to say.
Mr. Speaker, let me start today with the exams fiasco. On the day that thousands of young people had their A-level grades downgraded, the Prime Minister said, and I quote him, "The exam results are robust. They're good, they're dependable." The Education Secretary said, "There would absolutely not be a U-turn." A few days later, a U-turn. We learned yesterday that the Education Secretary knew well in advance that there was a problem with the algorithm. So a straight answer to a straight question, please, Prime Minister. When did the Prime Minister first know that there was a problem with the algorithm?
Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, perhaps I could begin by congratulating the right honourable gentleman on his birthday.
So what Boris Johnson does here is he never responds to the question. He avoids the question. So he's using this ridiculous congratulating him on his birthday, and he started to talk about something else. This is typical Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson is asked about X, and Boris Johnson starts talking about A, B, C, D, and E, and F. Boris Johnson will do whatever he can to avoid the question. Now, this is a typical Tory tactic, but Boris Johnson does it all the time.
And say to him that on the exams and the stress that young people have been through over the summer, both the Secretary of State for Education and I understand very well how difficult it has been for them and for their families going through a pandemic at a time when we have not been able, because of that pandemic, in common with most...
So what he's doing here is he's describing the problem. He's not actually responding to the question. The original question was, when did the Prime Minister first know about the problem with the algorithm? Now, it's a simple answer. I knew about it 6 months ago, or I knew about it 6 weeks ago, or I knew about it 6 days ago. This is a simple answer. Or I didn't know about it. But instead, Boris Johnson knows whatever answer he would give to that could be problematic. He decides to talk about something else.
Most other countries in the world to stage normal examinations, and as a result of what we learned about the tests, the results that had come in, we did institute a change. We did act. The students, the pupils of this country, now do have their grades, and I really ask the right honourable gentleman whether he will join me in congratulating those people.
That is not the question. The question was, when did you first know about the problem? See the way he is reflecting the question back onto the questioner. You know, it's like I ask you a question, and instead of answering my question, you respond with something else, and you ask me a question in return. This is Boris Johnson basically saying, I can't answer this question, so what I'll do is I'll ask you a question instead.
Pupils on their hard work, and whether he agrees with me that they deserve the grades they've got.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I've already expressed congratulations to all those students, and I do so again. But I want to go back to my question, which the Prime Minister avoided. And I know why he avoided it. Because he either knew of the problem with the algorithm and did nothing, or he didn't know when he should have. So let me ask again, when did the Prime Minister first know there'd be a problem with the algorithm?
Minister.
So once again, just to reiterate the question, when did the Prime Minister first know there was a problem with the algorithm? Now, of course, Boris Johnson will not answer that question.
Mr. Speaker, as he knows perfectly well, Ofqual made it absolutely clear time and again that in their view, the system that was in place was robust. Ofqual is, as he knows, an independent organisation, and credit.
But your minister said there was a problem with the algorithm. So now are you saying that your minister is telling lies or is misinformed? The education secretary said that there was a problem with the algorithm. The question Keir Starmer has for you is, when did you know about it? And Boris Johnson can't answer that question. He's talking about, once again, he's talking about something else.
credit had to be given to their views. All summer long, Mr. Speaker, he's been going around undermining confidence, spreading doubts, and in particular about the return to school in safe conditions. And it's absolutely true. And today is a great day because the parents, the pupils of this country, the teachers of this country are overwhelmed.
This is extremely frustrating to watch. There was a simple question asked, an important question. When did you know about the problem? Now, if you had nothing to hide, you would say, I discovered the problem just recently, or I discovered the problem a month ago. The problem, of course, following on from that was, why didn't you do something about it? Boris Johnson either knew about the problem or didn't know about the problem. And in both of those scenarios, it's a serious issue.
Overwhelmingly proving him wrong and proving the doubters wrong, Mr. Speaker, because they are going back to school in record numbers in spite of all the gloom and dubitation that he tried to spread. And I think
so once again, Boris Johnson isn't capable of actually responding to the question. He has to attack the messenger, shoot the messenger. He doesn't like the question, so he attacks the person asking the question. This is a sign of weakness. This is not a sign of strength. Someone in a strong position would knock the questions down with simple, easy to understand answers. Boris Johnson starts talking about something else. This is a sign of weakness.
The fine thing, Mr. Speaker, if today, after 3 months of refusing to do so, as pupils go back to school, if today finally he said that school was safe to go back to. Come on.
Keir Starmer.
Prime Minister is just tin-eared and making it up as he goes along. I'm surprised. The Education Secretary stood at that dispatch box yesterday and said and acknowledged that Labour's first priority has been getting children back to school. That's been our first priority. I've said it numerous times in this dispatch box. He knows it very well. He's just playing games. Mr. Speaker, and he's fooling nobody. Even his own MPs have run out of patience. The Vice Chair of the 22 Committee, the MP for Broxbourne, has said the government says one thing on Monday, changes its mind on Tuesday, something different is presented on Wednesday. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? Another of his MPs, who wisely wants to remain anonymous, perhaps in the chamber today. He or she said...
This is a masterstroke. You know, it's one thing to say, look, we are attacking you, but it's another thing to say that your own supporters, your own MPs, your own party is attacking you as well. Now, the Conservatives used to use this tactic, of course, on Jeremy Corbyn, when, his party was pretty much split down the middle. And it worked. It showed Jeremy Corbyn as out of control. And this tactic is fantastic because we know about it. I did a video just the other day about how the vice chair of the 1922 committee was talking about how the government are doing U-turn after U-turn. And it's embarrassing. So it's a very good tactic to use someone from your own party against you.
I am speaking for you because this is what was said. It's mess after mess. His own MPs, U-turn after U-turn. It's a fundamental issue of competence. God knows what's going on. There's no grip. His own MPs are right, aren't they?
Mr. Speaker, this is a leader of the opposition who backed remaining in the EU and now is totally...
How is this relevant to the discussion, Boris? Once again, Boris is grasping at straws here. Okay, how can I respond to this? My own party is against me. Members of my own government, well, not government, but party also are against me. The vice chair of the 1922 committee is saying that we're making a mess. So how can I respond to this? I'll attack the opposition because of his position in the past on Brexit. How is this relevant to the discussion on education?
Silent on the side, now has performed a U-turn. He backed, and perhaps he still does, Mr. Speaker. This is a leader of the opposition who...
This is typical right-wing tactic of whataboutism. I don't want to talk about X, so I'll start talking about what about Y? What about F? What about B? What about G? instead of actually talking about what we're supposed to be talking about.
Supported an IRA condoning politician who wanted to get out of NATO and now says absolutely nothing. This is a leader of the opposition who sat on the front bench whilst there was anti-Semitism.
I think there are questions being asked. We do need to try and answer the questions that's being put to the Prime Minister.
How disgraceful Boris Johnson is. He was asked a question about education. He couldn't answer the question, so he started to talk about Brexit, Keir Starmer's position on Remain, and he dragged Keir Starmer's work as a legal expert in Northern Ireland into this. How desperate is Boris Johnson? How bottom of the barrel is Boris Johnson? Whether you agree with Brexit, whether you agree with the Tories or whatever, you have to admit this is scraping the bottom of the barrel. Attacking a questioner on something that's not related to the question itself.
It will be helpful to those who are watching to know the answers, Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think it will be helpful to all those who are watching to know.
Minister, I think I'll make the decisions today. Come on, Prime Minister.
Sorry, well, Mr. Speaker, if I may say, I think it will be helpful to all those who are watching to know that this opposition and this leader of the opposition said absolutely nothing to oppose the method of examinations that was proposed, and indeed they opposed the teacher accreditation system that we eventually came up with. Is he now saying that those grades aren't right, or is it just Captain Hindsight leaping on a bandwagon and opposing a policy that he supported 2 weeks ago?
Boris Johnson acts as if he is a member of the opposition. He doesn't act as if he is the Prime Minister. He is responsible. He has a majority even. He is the head of the government. But he talks and acts as if he's a backbencher in the opposition bench.
Keir Starmer.
The problem is he's governing in hindsight. That's why he's making so many mistakes. Mr. Speaker, before I go on, the Prime Minister said something about the IRA, and I want him to take it back. I worked in Northern Ireland for 5 years with the police service of Northern Ireland, bringing peace. I prosecuted the Director of Public Prosecution, serious terrorists, for 5 years, working with the intelligence and security forces and with the police in Northern Ireland. Asked the Prime Minister to have the decency to withdraw that comment.
I'm sorry, Mr. Starmer, but Boris Johnson doesn't have any decency. If you pull someone off the street, a random person off the street, that person would have more decency than Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson does not take anything back. Boris Johnson does not apologise. But let's see what Boris Johnson has to say in respect to that.
Mr. Prime Minister, it's the same every time. Pretend the problem doesn't exist, brush away scrutiny, make the wrong decision, then blame somebody else. This has got to change, because the next major decision for the Prime Minister is on the furlough scheme. The jobs of millions of people are at risk. The longer he delays, the more they're at risk. So will he act now, finally get this decision right, and commit to extend the furlough for those sectors and those workers that desperately need it?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what we are doing in this government is getting people back to school, getting our pupils back to school in spite of all the doubts that he's tried to sow, and we are getting people back to work. What he wants to do is extend the furlough scheme, on which this country has already spent £40 billion. What we would rather do is get people into work through our Kickstart scheme.
You notice how Boris Johnson didn't respond to the request to take back the comments that he made about the IRA and Keir Starmer's work in prosecuting members of the IRA. That's disgusting. You know, Boris Johnson knows he said something wrong, but he's not man enough to actually say, okay, I apologize. He doesn't have the guts to do it. It's disgusting. You know, whether you agree with Boris Johnson or not on other issues, you have to agree with me on this, that he doesn't have the guts to actually apologize for anything. He doesn't have the integrity to actually take back something he has said that was wrong.
Which we are launching today, £2 billion to spend to support people, young people in particular, to get the jobs that they need. He wants to keep people out of work in suspended animation. We want to...
It's not about... There are situations where people can't go back to work. There are situations where they can't go back to work because there is no work, or that their places of work have been greatly modified so that there isn't sufficient work for these people. The economy is suffering at the moment. Your government has been trying to convince people to go back into city centres in order to allow sandwich bars and small businesses in the area to recover. But until those businesses recover, wouldn't it make sense to allow the workers in those businesses to be furloughed until it's possible for them to come back to work, or until there is work for them? Now, I have talked about this before on this channel, how a lot of these businesses will never return because our way of working has completely changed. More and more people are going to work from home. Pandemic or no pandemic, this has been changed. This has been forced upon us, and many people have adapted, and companies have adapted, and many companies see, well, we're actually saving money and we're increasing productivity by keeping people at home. So encouraging them to send their staff back into offices isn't going to work, even if you pay them, because they see the overall cost of keeping people out of the office is beneficial, and productivity has increased. Now, not in all cases, but it seems to be generally the case.
Move this country forward. That's the difference between him and us.
Can I just say there was a question about the allegation and all that? I was very concerned that was the point I was making. I think, in fairness, I'm sure you would like to withdraw.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to say that I think that I listened to the protestations of the Right Honourable Gentleman. I think they would have been more in order throughout the long years in which he supported.
You did something bad here, Boris. It's like the child who, who's in the classroom and, broke the window. And we all see that the window is broken. And we all know who broke the window. And we ask the child, are you going to apologize for breaking the window? And their response is, well, what about that other child? He broke a window some time ago, or he may have broke a window 6 months ago, and he didn't get punished, or, we should be focusing on him, not on me. This is Boris Johnson, acting like a friggin' child. He doesn't have the guts to actually say, what I said was wrong, I apologize. He starts talking about something else. Once again, this is a demonstration of weakness. This is not strength.
He supported a leader of the Labour Party.
Leave it as it was, yes.
When the Prime Minister's worked with the security and intelligence forces prosecuting criminals and terrorists, he can lecture me. I asked him to do the decent thing, but doing the decent thing and this Prime Minister don't go together. This has been a wasted summer. The government should have spent it preparing for the autumn and winter. Instead, they've lurched from crisis to crisis, U-turn to U-turn. To correct one error, even two might make sense. But when the government's notched up 12 U-turns and rising, the only conclusion is serial incompetence. That serial incompetence is holding Britain back. Will the Prime Minister take responsibility and finally get a grip?
No, he won't. He won't take responsibility and he won't get a grip. What he will do is he will blame other people. And I think Keir Starmer laid it out very clearly. Ignore the problem, brush away any scrutiny, and then blame someone else. And this, you could put it on a banner, you could put it in some type of slogan, and this would represent Boris Johnson's government. over the last year, or how long, I don't know how long he's been in government as Prime Minister. It's about a year, I think. This would represent ignore, sweep away, and blame someone else.
Mr. Speaker, I take full responsibility for everything that has happened under this government throughout my period in office. And actually what has happened so far...
You notice this is a sort of weasel word, or this is a sort of trick that politicians play. Yeah, I take responsibility for everything, but not specific things. It's a way of avoiding responsibility, but actually claiming responsibility at the same time. It plays good to the crowd. I take responsibility for everything, but as soon as you point out something, they will say, "No, that's not my responsibility. That's someone else's responsibility." Or it's the same with the pandemic. Boris Johnson never said during the pandemic, "I take responsibility for the numbers." He'll say, "I take responsibility for everything." But as soon as you say, "Okay, the numbers of people who have died, do you take responsibility for that?" He said, "No, it's not my responsibility. It's the pandemic, or it's something that came along without our knowledge, or we weren't able to prepare for it. No country could have prepared for it." So this is typical of politicians, but especially Boris Johnson. He will say, "I take responsibility for everything," which means nothing. In reality, it means nothing. But as soon as you ask him about something in particular, he will say, no, that's not my responsibility. He's done it on many occasions.
Is that we have succeeded in turning the tide of this pandemic, and in spite of the negativity and the constant sniping from the opposition, we are seeing a country that is not only going back to school, but going back to work. Britain is in the lead in developing vaccines. We're in the lead in finding cures for this disease, in dexamethasone, in finding treatments for this disease. And not only that, Mr. Speaker, we are taking this country forward in spite of the extreme difficulties that we face. What I think the people of this country would appreciate is he and I, the Labour front bench, everybody across this House, coming together and uniting and saying that it is safe for kids to get back to school. And
No, you want people to agree with you. That's what you want. You don't want people to come together and be united. You want to get away from criticism. That's what you want. When Boris Johnson says he wants unity, no, he wants people to shut the F up. That's what he wants. He wants people to be united in silence. He wants to be able to do whatever the hell he wants without any type of criticism. That's what Boris Johnson talks about when he means unity, not coming together and trying to fix the problem. Because if all the politicians came together to try and fix the problem, you know who would be in the way? Boris Johnson would be in the way.
And I must say, Mr. Speaker, we still have not heard those words from the Right Honourable Gentleman. Will he now say school is safe?
I've said it so many times. School is safe. My own children have been in school throughout. There's no issue.
I wish I had an image of a sucker punch. If you don't know what a sucker punch is, I suggest you look it up on Google. This is a sucker punch. It's a punch. It knocked Boris Johnson to the ground. He's out cold. Get up there and say schools are safe. What does Keir Starmer do? Schools are safe. I've said it on a number of occasions, and I'm not just saying it, I'm actually following it up by sending my own children back to school. Boris, you should actually do some research. You should actually know what you're going to say before actually saying it. This is like, the bully being punched in the face after the bully trying to punch everyone in the classroom. And the bully sitting on the floor, his head spinning, going, what the hell happened?
Issue on this, the Prime Minister seeking to divide instead of... I wrote to him on the 18th of May in confidence and in private, offering my support to him to get kids back to school. The only reason they weren't back before the summer was because of his incompetent Education Secretary. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister will recall that before the recess, I asked him if he would meet the COVID-19 Bereaved Families for Justice group.
Just before I get on to this, I think it's quite interesting that Keir Starmer said that he wrote to the Prime Minister in private. Now, Boris Johnson Boris Johnson was shaking his head or whatever. And Boris Johnson will later say, oh no, well, he never said it here in Parliament. I think it's something very interesting that Keir Starmer wrote to Boris Johnson in private and said, I will support you. I think that means a lot, because he could have just, played party politics and said, look, I'm going to wait for Boris Johnson to collapse. I'm going to undermine Boris Johnson wherever I can. And he didn't do that. This shows leadership to me. This is someone who has said, I'm going to put politics aside, even though the Prime Minister is Boris Johnson, who's incapable of doing that. And I'm going to actually reach out to Boris Johnson and say, I'm going to give you my support where I can on this particular issue. This is unbelievable, especially in these days. We're so polarized at the moment. Politics is polarized, society is polarized. And this man here wrote a letter to Boris Johnson saying, I will give you my support on this issue. It wasn't a blank check, it was on this issue. I think this is noble. I'm not Keir Starmer's, let me be straight here, I'm not Keir Starmer's biggest fan. But I think what he's doing here shows true leadership. Now, Boris Johnson, of course, will ignore it and avoid it, but Boris Johnson knows he received the letter, and Keir Starmer knows he received the letter. And they both know what's in that letter. And of course, if Boris Johnson denies it, Keir Starmer could, print it out and give it to the newspapers if they don't believe him. But Boris Johnson maybe is calculating enough not to do that. But once again, it does show the difference, the contrast in leadership here.
I had the privilege of meeting the families on the 15th of July. They gave me incredibly moving accounts of how COVID-19 had taken their loved ones from them. On Sky News last week, the Prime Minister was asked if he would meet the families. And he said, and I'll quote, "Of course I will meet the bereaved. Of course I will do that." But yesterday, they received a letter from the Prime Minister saying that meeting them was now, regrettably, not possible. The Prime Minister will understand the frustration and the hurt of those families that he said one thing to camera and another to them. Can I urge the Prime Minister to reconsider, to do the right thing and find time to meet these grieving families?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if I may say to the right honourable gentleman, it's absolutely typical of him that he should frame it in that way, because when I made that answer, of course I was very happy to meet the families of the
Of course you're very happy to meet with people who are angry with you. Yeah, you're like, just as much you are so happy to meet with people who experience flooding around the country. You were, how long did it take? A couple of hours? As soon as the flooding happened, you were right on. No, actually it took a few days. Almost a week, I think, in one case, before you actually turned up. So you're very happy to meet people who are not donating to the party and who are angry that your government is incompetent.
bereaved, and I sympathise deeply with all those who have lost loved ones throughout this pandemic, and we all feel their pain and their grief. But it turns out that this particular group that he refers to are currently in litigation against the government, and I will certainly meet them once that litigation is concluded.
So they're in litigation with the government. I wonder why they're in litigation with the government. Of course, if this is true, it would be wrong for Boris Johnson to meet with them. Then why didn't he say that in his letter? Why didn't he say, look, I would like to meet with you, but unfortunately, because you are in litigation with us, it would be inappropriate for me to meet with you. That would be acceptable. But he didn't say that in his letter. He just said it's impossible. It's impossible for me to meet with you. This smells like a U-turn. It smells like Boris Johnson said, yeah, I'll do whatever. And then he realized, oh, crap. Who do I have to meet? Who do I have to talk to? Ah, crap, those victims' families, they're so annoying. I have to actually answer questions, difficult questions. I don't want to do that. Attorney General, get me out of this. Dominic Cummings, get me out of this.
But I may say to him, it would be a better thing, rather than trying to score points in that way, if he joined together with us and with this government and said, not only is school safe, but it is also safe to go back to. By the way, Mr. Speaker, that's the first time in 4 months he said it. As I'm delighted to have extracted it from him over this dispatch box. He's never said it to me in the House of Commons.
Boris is able to lie. Boris can lie in Parliament, and there are no consequences. That's the problem with Parliament. In Parliament, you can lie. In other parliaments in other parts of the world, you can't lie. I really don't understand why in the UK Parliament, because I'm ignorant of this fact, but you are allowed to lie, and there is no punishment for that. So Boris Johnson can say whatever the hell he wants and get away with it.
I hope, Mr. Speaker, he will also say that it is safe for the workforce of this country to go back to work in a COVID secure way. We want...
so you thought you had painted Keir Starmer into a corner by, I know what I'll say. I'll get him to say that schools are safe. Then I will have defeated him. And then he got up and said, yeah, I said that already. Schools are safe. He's like, oh, crap. Okay, let me see. Let me try something else. I want him to say that workplaces are safe. And then if he says that, maybe move on to the next level. I want him to say that public toilets are safe. This is just obscene. This is obscene and absurd. This is all I'm going to show about this from this recording. The Prime Minister and other people start to speak after this. I'll leave a link to the original video in the description if you want to watch it in its entirety. But this is just another disgusting display from Boris Johnson, a demonstration that he has no decency, and he is not a strong leader. He's weak. And I said this before, that he needs those seats behind him to be full, because these people cheer him on. They drown out the questions being asked by the opposition, or the responses to those meandering word salads that come out of Boris Johnson's mouth when they're responded to by the opposition. He's alone now. He wants his cheering yahoos behind him. I hope that's not going to happen for a while, because it demonstrates that Boris Johnson, as I've said before, is an empty suit. Let me know in the comments section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot. I want to say a big thank you to all of my patrons. You ensure that this channel continues to exist. I'm eternally grateful for all of your support. If you join Patreon, you will receive instant access to our Discord server, where we have both audio and video chats. You can chat with me and other patrons, where we discuss important and non-important issues. Becoming a patron per month costs about the same as a large coffee, so why not check it out?